on the edge of glory.
Harwin's really hot now, and then end of the episode, bang, dead.
Are they foreshadowing?
Hi everyone, and welcome back to We Need to Talk About, a weekly video series where Digital Spy talks about the biggest shows in the world. And this time around, that's House of the Dragon episode 6. So, I'm your host David Opie this week, and I'm joined by Ali.
Hello.
And Janet Lee.
Hello.
So, before we get started, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because you want to get these videos as soon as possible. So, this week, we're going to be carrying on bringing our own questions and our own theories and our own ideas into play, because there's so much to talk about, especially in this episode in particular. First of all, I think we need to start with that opening scene, episode 6. There's a lot going on. There's a big time jump, and Rhaenyra goes through it in more ways than one.
Oh, yes.
That birth scene, initial reactions, please.
I actually thought it was pretty great because unlike her mother, who had no agency whatsoever, Rhaenyra takes control of the situation completely, even to the point where she's literally just delivered the baby and Alison has summoned the baby to her. Fresh, brand new baby, brand spanking new baby. I need to see this baby right now.
And then she plays that card where she's like, oh, what are you doing here? You should be resting.
You should be relaxing. But she takes ownership completely. And I thought that scene was such a contrast to her mother's that it really works on so many levels.
I was kind of like, it was weird. Basically, the episode opened, and obviously this is literally the first time we're seeing Emma Darcy in the role of Rhaenyra after the time jump. And my first thought was like, I was genuinely struck by, I thought it was a flashback, like the casting on Emma Darcy versus the woman who plays her mother in like the pre-time jump. The woman who plays, she's called Emma, right? The character,
Emma, yeah.
and Sean Brooke, like they look so similar in that moment. And obviously because it's like, it's a similar shot and to when we saw her giving birth in the opening episode of the show, I was like, wow, like, the casting is crazy. And also, like you said, it makes you immediately start to think about the differences between Rhaenyra's experience and her mother's, and kind of what's happening there. Obviously, Emma like has the emergency C-section at the end of that episode. Whatever happens in that moment with Viserys and sacrifice, and we get Aegon. Like the difference in their experience, I thought was really interesting. And we have like a really violent birth scene in that first episode of the show, and then this, which is still has kind of like shock and pain involved, but it's like you said, Rhaenyra's in so much more control. I think it was very interesting to open with a scene of Rhaenyra giving birth and seeing Rhaenyra as a mother as like the first thing we see in this new kind of era of the show, given how much of the pre-time skip stuff was about Rhaenyra kind of battling with what being a mother might be like, and what does duty mean, and she didn't want to be locked in a tower and kind of having children and producing heirs. And that's the first thing we see of her in this mode. I thought was really interesting.
And it's not her first kid either, which is interesting. There's suddenly all these kids are thrown in. But it says a lot about her character, her resilience, and the sheer stubbornness. I was quite impressed. I was like, wow, you really want to stick it to Alison. You are dragging yourself up these stairs. Yeah, like,
that was crazy.
Afterbirth came out and she's still going.
But also it shows the real breakdown of that relationship, because she does not trust that woman with her baby at all. Not at all. Not even for like a few seconds to see the baby in the presence of her father. She's like, I need to be there because you cannot be trusted. So what has happened in those 10 years?
I know. This episode is bookended with two kind of scenes of people going into labour, right? We have this with Rhaenyra at the start, and then the end we see Helena's like complicated labour at the end with Damon in Pentos, and obviously that scene was really interesting. We talked about how the Rhaenyra scene mirrors Aegon's birth in the first bit of the series, and then that end scene with Helaena is like that real moment of kind of parallels, because she can't give birth, and the Maester turns to Damon and he's like, we could operate, we could try and basically give her an emergency C-section and it might save the baby. And then Damon's like, would she survive? And he's like, probably not. And we don't see Damon like kind of respond. And I got the sense, I was like,
I thought he did. I thought he was like, no.
Yeah, I took it to be him. He wouldn't do that, which I thought was really interesting. The show has always pitched Viserys as kind of like the light side and Damon is the dark side, right? Yeah. Damon is morally compromised, Viserys is not. But in this moment, we've seen how that maybe isn't the case when it comes to what he's willing to sacrifice.
I wonder if that was in part because of what he saw happen to Amma, and he knows how horrific that went, and he doesn't even want that. I mean, he bludgeoned his other wife to death, presumably, but yet he doesn't want. But yet he can't bring himself allegedly.
No one saw it. It didn't happen.
But he can't bring himself to go to that levels because he knows how horrific that was. But what I also really loved was, even though it didn't go the way they wanted it to, even though the birth didn't happen, in some ways, she still had a lot of her agency of her own. She made her own decision. She knew she didn't want to die in some horrific childbirth, and so she turns to a dragon, Dracarys. I love that moment.
Yeah.
And she's like, this the thing is like, I think it's interesting as well because Lena makes the decision herself, like you said, like she has agency in that moment. She's like, I don't want to either. I took it to be basically, I don't want to live. If my baby dies, I'm not sure how I can live for myself, and also I don't want to take the risk, so I'm going to kind of take this decision myself. And yeah, she goes to Vhagar, the biggest dragon in the world or whatever, which is very cool. And she stares and she says Dracarys, but it isn't like a Dracarys moment. Yeah. It's like a begging moment. She's like pleading with this dragon, which is interesting. Yeah, and the dragon looks sad. The dragon is not like happy to do it, and looks her in the eye. It was a really tender moment. Like, it's interesting the way that word gets used in this show. Obviously, when we meet Daenerys in Game of Thrones and she says it's this power word. And then in this episode, we have one of Rhaenyra's boys trying to get a little dragon to do it. He's like, can I say it? Can I say it? Please, can I say Dracarys? And it's like quite a weird, funny moment. And that word comes back at the end and it has all of these other tragic implications.
We've talked a lot about birth. What comes from birth? Babies. So there are a ton of new kids and new characters running around, trying to Dracarys, and also doing some questionable stuff out the window in their bedroom. We will get onto that. So let's dive into the family dynamics, because these kids really stir things up, whether they mean to or not. Anyone got a favourite kid they want to jump in on?
Well, I think it's maybe it's more...
I love Jace's little face, I won't lie. I think it's cute.
Yeah, it's worth, I guess, thinking about, like, we open with Rhaenyra giving birth to Joffrey, and then over the course of the episode, we meet the kind of three new branches of the family, right? We have Rhaenyra and Laenor / Harwin's children. We have Dracarys and Luke. He goes by Luke, which is very cute at one point. Lucerys and Joffrey, obviously. And then we have, and they're all brown-haired, definitely not, they just don't look like Targaryens.
I love the way that the DNA test is for your hair. Like, that's how we know.
Science.
And then we get Alison. We meet Alicent and Viserys' family as it is now. Like, we meet kind of grown-up Aegon, played by David Tennant and George Tennant's son, which is very funny. We also meet Aemond, who you get absolutely rancid vibes from day one. Obviously, just like a weird little freak. And then you also meet Alicent and Viserys' daughter, Helaena, who looks a lot like Rhaenyra, which I think is supposed to be interesting given the conversation we see them have. And then near the end of the episode, we meet Damon and Laena's two daughters, Baela Targaryen and Rhaenyra Targaryen. So we've got 6 or 7 new characters essentially in the show now. And yeah, I think I don't know if I have a favourite one, but I have a least favourite one, and it's Aemon.
Yeah, he's a lot.
Even though the throne has been given to Rhaenyra and she's a woman, it helps her cause in some ways that she's had 3 sons to kind of secure up her succession rights. So if anything happens to her, the realm can feel comforted knowing that a male will eventually take her place.
Thank
But
God.
So at least they have that. So if they're like, oh, we don't want Rhaenyra, but actually she's got 3 sons, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's so true. What did we all think about, like, the Harwin, the fatherhood situation with, like, Harwin and Laenor and the rumours. That's so much of this episode is about.
I love it.
Yeah,
Love
so
the
much of
gossip.
people
I was
being like, that's absolutely not Laenor's children, obviously.
And they're like, I love when Rhaenyra is like, oh my god, have you heard the rumours of Stark? And I'm like,
Come on,
really?
girl.
Yeah, this
Come
has been
on.
a long time coming, let's be real.
But I love the way that everybody's secretly on the same page. Like, I took it to mean like Laenor definitely knows. He definitely knows. He has to know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think Laenor and Rhaenyra are in a situation where they are making children.
No, I don't think they're smushing,
Absolutely not.
making the beef with two bats.
Smushing has come up twice today in very different contexts.
No, they're definitely not. But I like the way that he's accepted that these are still his children, but also leaves room for Harwin to kind of have his moment with his child. And I do like the way that even though they are married and they're in a situation where it isn't a love match, I like that they have a friendship, and I like the fact that she still found love. It seems like they are in love. It seems like her and Harwin have a really deep connection, which just makes everything all the more heartbreaking when the show just unravels and unravels. Like, it's a Game of Thrones show. Never get comfortable. Never get too attached to any character. It just ends badly for you.
Last week I was like, Harwin's hot. Look at this guy. And this week I was like, Harwin's really hot now. And then end of the episode, bang, dead.
That was me and Joffrey last week too. It's killing me. They're killing my hopes as quickly as they kill off characters, honestly.
I think it's interesting, like maybe this is an Alicent thing more than anything, but I thought it was interesting the way that Alicent's family dynamic is very like rigid, and it's about succession. The way she talks to Aegon, the way she talks about Aemond is very like, you have duties, this is what you need to do. And then the way that we see Rhaenyra interact with her children is way more like caring almost. Well, not caring, but we see
more
tender
loving,
moments.
more. Yeah.
We see those moments more than we do with Alicent. And the only time we see an attempt at that from Alicent is when she's talking to Helaena and she's kind of just she can't connect
She
with
looks
Helaena
bored.
at all.
She looks bored as hell. Like,
she's like, Mom, give me that iPad. I don't want to talk to you.
She just looks like she is not engaged with those children at all. And it's funny, like you say, because Rhaenyra was always this like power-driven woman, and Alicent was always billed as the softer side, the more caring side. And now you see them grown up, and Alicent is so cold and so hard and so focused on the throne and succession. And whilst Rhaenyra still has some of that in her, she's softened a lot.
Testament to, not to take it to a silly place, but testament to the level of detachment that Alicent has from her children is that she walks in on Aegon masturbating over King's Landing out the window.
His Homelander moment.
His Homelander moment. And she's just like, anyway, let's talk about this. She's not even like phased by it.
Such an interesting choice to do it out the window. Often teenage boys would prefer privacy, I would imagine.
Well, he's got that cocky streak, right? So
quite literally.
Yeah. Go ahead.
He wants the world to see. I mean, and and it's very on the nose symbolically, but I kind of enjoy that sometimes about this franchise. You know, like, this is his kingdom, and he can do what he wants with it. He can spread his seed, as it were.
But it's not, right?
But
it's not his kingdom.
No, true. But in his head, you know, he's like, this is why I deserve.
My domain.
But it's funny because even he doesn't seem to care about the throne as much. She's like, give it to her. I don't care. I don't want it. And his mother's like, you are the threat. You are the threat. Calm down, Alison. You okay? She's grabbing his face. I'm like, Alison, scare the boy. Gonna scare him.
That was a great moment. I also thought it's a Homelander moment, absolutely. But also my Game of Thrones senses were tingling. And I was thinking about children in towers, and I was like,
"Oh my god!"
There are two. Obviously, Game of Thrones, the first season of Game of Thrones opens with Bran being pushed out a window in it's a bit different tower, but out a large open window. And obviously, in season 4 or 5, when Tommen throws himself out the window, again in King's Landing, out of an open window. I think that
are they foreshadowing?
Something is happening there, right?
I mean,
like
that's a vulnerable position to be in, right? Yeah. What he's doing. He's on the edge. Yeah. He's very distracted, let's say.
Yeah. On the edge of glory.
But yeah, Tommen, like, obviously that scene in 5 or 6, like, when Tommen kills himself, is like one of the most shocking things in Game of Thrones. Like, he gets up out of his chair and he walks out the window. Like,
there's such a quiet around that.
It's really, it's a really like stark thing, and I thought it's interesting because it's King's Landing again, and it's a young person in line for the throne. I took it to be some foreshadowing is happening there in like a funny way, maybe a wink and a nod, but also, I don't know, bad things.
So we've talked a little bit about Alison, but there is so much more to say about Alison. I kind of wanted to draw attention to, there's that really big confrontation moment where Rhaenyra comes to Alison with a proposal, a way of kind of like keeping the peace, because things have not been great in King's Landing. So yeah, she has the idea of like, let's get our kids to marry, because that's always a winner. That always works for us, even though they're technically related again. Love it, incest for life. Apparently, according to Game of Thrones, not me.
I saw that Rick and Morty piece you wrote.
Yeah, we know the truth.
They got it right. They got it right. They got it right. But so Rhaenyra, and obviously King Viserys is like, oh my god, yes, this is the dream. Because one, he loves incest. Two, he's like, oh my goodness, peace.
Yeah,
clearly
that's all he wants.
He's just desperate. He's so old and frail and falling apart, and he's like, just give me a day. Just give me a day of peace. But obviously Alison is not having any of it. She's disgusted by the idea of even entertaining a proposal from Rhaenyra of peace. And then to deflect, she really viciously and savagely deflects by pointing out what's happening with Rhaenyra in terms of, she's leaking.
Oh yes, it's
rude. I love the way it's
so
horrible, but I love the way that they again use womanhood to kind of undercut her authority, because it just again shows how women have, even in her position, still have very little power or limited power. Like, you've drawn this attention to her, something that should be so trivial when she's making such a big point. How could you do this, Alison? You're a woman. Some female power, please.
Yeah, where is this girl power? Like, honestly,
where's the solidarity?
And all the men are like, judging her and being shitty in general, obviously. In that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the way that Alison weaponizes that moment, like you say, but also it's just this testament to, in this 10-year time jump that's happened, that the power dynamic between Alison and Rhaenyra has completely flipped, right? Like, when we last leave them in pre-time jump, Alison feels like she's on the back foot until the very last moment when she realizes that Rhaenyra has maybe lied to her and is not the person she thought she was. And in the time since, it's kind of swinged completely around, and now we're in a world where Alison is like in the council meetings every time, clearly.
Right? What is she doing there?
She's speaking for Viserys. She's speaking on his behalf. Like, every time he goes to speak, he kind of looks to her for approval. When Lionel comes to the meeting later on to resign, she's like, why are you here? What is this about? She's found ways to take power, and the way she's going to kind of use that against Rhaenyra. I think it's so interesting. I think this show starts and you're like, it's going to be about succession and what it means to like have children. It's not. It's actually just about these two women who can't work out how to like be friends again, and their clash is going to be the thing that kind of rips
it does.
apart.
It's driving everything, and Alison is the one, like, because she can't let go of this grudge. Which, by the way, let it go. She had sex, okay.
I know. I don't really get it. Some parts of me, I'm like, you and Cristen Cole, you're both kind of like
petty.
Yeah, petty and rude. Like,
Cristen was a petty bitch when they
were
walking.
What a cruel little prick.
Yeah, he's the most hated, easily hated.
Yeah.
I can't even describe him. I'm consumed of rage. I can't even.
Yeah.
He's just doing way too much. He's doing way too much. Like, it's been 10 years. You've not gotten over it.
Oh my God,
not found somebody else.
Yeah,
come on.
Real.
There are other people around. Like, live your life, man. Like, honestly,
embarrassing.
It was, obviously there was a betrayal aspect in her eyes and the lying and things. But I don't know.
It's been 10 years.
It's been 10 years, but I love a queer reading. So there's a little part of me that's clinging on to the idea that she had feelings and also felt betrayed on that more visceral,
maybe
emotional level. Maybe.
I think you kind of have to add that at least into the recipe for it to make more sense. Like, whether that's something that she's conscious of or they are intentionally playing with, the show knows it's playing with. Like, we've all said that from day one when we first meet those characters. And the only reason Alison would be so heartbroken by that decision was if she was in some ways like literally romantically heartbroken by it. It has to be an element of that pain. That pain has to come from somewhere a bit more deep rooted.
well, Ali in particular, you wanted to chat a little bit about Larys Strong. He is scheming. Why is he scheming? What is he doing?
Well, I think it's interesting to go from talking about Alison, what is Alison willing to do? What does she want? To like her partner in crime, which was a goop at the end of this episode. So the episode, about 3/4 of the way through, she comes back from from talking to Viserys after Lionel tries to resign. She walks into her chamber and Larys is there, who we've met previously, starting from episode 3. And back then we were like, oh, he's schemy, he's got Littlefinger vibes, this is exciting, it's what we want from Game of Thrones. And that's really kind of come to fruition now. And so they have that scene where she basically, you find out that he's been informing her about what's happening outside the castle, she's been informing him, they have this exchange of information. She tells him, listen, your dad tried to resign, he wants to protect your brother, he's going to take him back to Hardhome or wherever it is. And we kind of see the machinations of Larys trying to work out what he can do. And obviously that ends with him taking the initiative, for whatever reason, to he hires a bunch of criminals who are on death row, cuts out their tongues, and then sends them to his own ancestral home and burns it down with his brother and dad inside.
Cold.
It's absolutely ice cold. And I think the interesting thing that we don't know about Larys is that I don't have a clear idea of what his goal is yet. Like beyond proximity to power, like what does his end goal do? Because I think so. He does all that, and then the episode ends with a really cool speech, which I've got written down, and a conversation with Alison, where she's like, she basically, you see the shock on her face. She was venting, and maybe she thought she could say it out loud, but she didn't know that he was going to do that, and she realizes the mistake she's made. And the question is, did Larys do that also to put her on the back foot, right? Because he's like, you do owe me now. You really owe me. I know you can say you didn't know, but I will tell people. Basically, I will tell people you put me up to it. So we're locked in now, baby.
But it's true. What does he want? What does he want?
I love a little monologue moment at Game of Thrones, and it ends with a speech where he says, "What are children but a weakness, a folly, a futility? Through them you imagine you cheat the great darkness of its victim. You'll persist forever in some form or another, as if they'll keep you from the dust. But for them you surrender what you should not. You may know what is the right thing to be done, but love stays the hand. Love is a downfall. Better to make your way through life unencumbered, if you ask me." Basically, he's like, don't have kids, don't fall in love, it fucks you up.
Yeah, and he's cut off all his ties to anything that could remotely be encumbering him, shall we say, like all of them.
Cut him like a tongue. Get them all.
Well, the other thing, the tongue moment was like absolutely grim. The other thing, I mean, I'm not the keeper of the Easter egg, so I don't have a direct answer, but there's a moment where we see the group of mercenaries that he's created looking over at the home they're going to burn down, and the camera looks at a pin on their chest, which I assume is a reference to something, but I didn't have it kind of on deck.
I don't know. I've been looking and looking and looking, and the question, do you guys know? Somebody must know.
Somebody must know. Because
I was looking and I was like, is there anything in the books? Is it something to do with the Strongs? And it's like that sigil of the little beetle. And it's got to be something to do with Larys. It's got to be something to do with maybe something that's coming up, because it's not something to do with how strong. So what is it? Is this like some new secret group that he's making to do all his... I'm intrigued.
Well, I was thinking...
It's fashion. Could it be this new wave that's going to come through King's Landing?
Well, it's like definitely, it's giving secret society, right? We have a badge, you have to cut off your tongue. Like, we've got kind of a ritualistic thing, and we've got some kind of like an insignia. So it's already, I think you're right. I think we're seeing the pieces fall into place for something. But yeah, if you're watching this and you know the answer, please put it in the comments so I can read it and I can...
So, from secret societies to not so secret, morally compromised, out in the open, Damon Targaryen, bit of a monster. We sort of love him, sort of hate him.
A monster with a heart.
A monster with a heart.
Apparently.
There's a lot, and we mentioned already a bit about obviously what happens with his wife and the dragon at the end. But what about Damon's state of play in general? Because, you know, he's still a key player, and even though he doesn't have many huge scenes this week, he's in the mix, let's say. So, what do we think this episode means for him moving forward?
You can see Lena just trying to urge him back into their society, urge him back to their world, their life. And he's like, nah, I'm cool. I'll stay here. Because where are they? They're in...
Pentos.
Pentos, yes. In Pentos.
I get it. I'm like
he's lost Rhaenyra. He's lost the love of his life, his niece. So hiding out.
He's like,
just hiding out.
Without incest, what does he have? Like,
yeah, it's really. When he's not an uncle, he doesn't know who he is anymore. We have like, they really only have like, I guess 2.5 scenes of Damon, but they stuck with me because we have the scene where they're having dinner at their like mansion they're staying in Pentos, and the guy who's like the mayor or whatever is like, let's give a speech to Aegon the Conqueror, and then he basically propositions Damon and Lena and says, will you team up with us? Will you use your dragons and House Valerian's dragon to defend Pentos from the Triarchy? Who we heard about
back again.
We're back again.
Back.
And then and Damon's like, oh yeah, maybe. And then later on, Lena and him have that conversation, like you said, Janet, where she's like, we're not dragons for hire. Like I'm a Valerian. Like we matter to her. In her head, she's like, we're a high house. Like we have power. We have a homeland. We have a keep that we should be back in. And you are not the man I married. This is not. You're Damon Targaryen. Like basically, like wake up. Because he has given up. He's drinking bad wine.
He's let his hair grow out again. Last week he had the snazzy cut, and now he's back to like, whatever. I'm just gonna let my wig grow out.
So now that his wife has sadly died, maybe he will wake up. Maybe he'll come back for Rhaenyra now.
Because she's like, Lena before she dies is like, let's go back to Driftmark. Basically, let's take the kids. Let's go back to Driftmark. Let's try and get back in on the stuff. And now obviously Rhaenyra and her kind of group and her family have left King's Landing, so maybe they'll I imagine there'll be a new alliance forming. I'm really excited to see what the deal is with Damon's daughters as well. We've got the one that has a dragon and the one that doesn't. We've got Baela and Rhaenyra. I can't remember which is which, but there's the whole thing where the youngest daughter has the dragon egg and it's not hatching. And Lena is like, basically what she says is sometimes you have to fight for your dragon. It doesn't just get born to you, which I thought was interesting because the show is so much about birthright and that sort of thing. And in some ways, Damon is the dragon that Lena has like fought for in lots of ways. And basically what she's saying is, I wasn't a dragon when I was born, but I got Vhagar when. That's what I took it to mean anyway. I got Vhagar when me and Damon got married. And I imagine what's going to happen now is Baela, the youngest daughter who doesn't have a dragon, will be given Vhagar because her mother has died. Because that to me would make sense. And that's it, because she's like a 9-year-old girl with the biggest dragon in the world. That's just quite cool. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens with those. Now we're going to get the Targaryens and the Valerians back together.
Yeah, true.
What would you do if you had a dragon and you were 9 years old? I'm like,
I'd fly to school.
You're so quick.
Yes.
You've been thinking about this.
Oh yes. I'd be like, hi guys. Do you see my dragon parked outside?
They're like, Janet, why were you 5 minutes late? And you were like, have you seen the dragon? Had to find somewhere to put it.
Yeah, don't worry about me.
That's true. They're fast, but parking is obviously an issue. What about you, Ali?
I think just flying around as a 9-year-old with a giant dragon, no one could say anything to you, right? If you're having like someone's giving you a hard time at school, or there's a teacher you didn't like, you'd be like, look at the dragon the size of a house, or the size of 4 houses that I've got.
What did you say?
Exactly.
Dragon there.
That makes sense, but you're both obviously missing out on the idea of you could like charge people for dragon rides. Like you could.
Oh my god, yes.
You'd be the richest 9-year-old, and you have a dragon. Like
never mind power. You can make some cash money.
Make it rain.
Yeah.
So that's all the biggest things we need to talk about this week. Let us know what you thought about everything we raised, and thank you so much for watching. And please don't forget to come back next week, because we're going to be talking about House of the Dragon, episode 7.
Woo! Let us know what you would do with a dragon if you were a 9-year-old.
Yes, please.
Money.
Bye.
Bye.